Hey guys, so we're into the fourth episode of the Do Good podcast, and I have a very special guest today. Actually, one of my mentors, I've known him for years. For a short period of time, he was my client. His name is Matt Piepenburg. And whenever the world seems a little dark, or I need advice, or the stock market's down, or I just need like some kind of mentorship, I go to Matt. And Matt, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, thanks. It's really great to be here. And I'm thinking as you were saying this about mentors, we were talking before we hit record. I have kids that are 27 and 29, and I was as a famous joke where I live in France. There's a moralist named La Rochefoucauld. He wrote centuries ago, and he said that the old are fond of giving advice because they're no longer capable of being a bad example. So it's like really easy to be a mentor and give advice. I think the best mentors, as we're talking about, are people that have had successes and failures, whether that's in business or life or relationships, certainly in markets, which is my domain. But for your audience, I don't want to appear condescending. And not that old yet. I have young kids, but I did come up in my 20s on Wall Street and in the markets and hedge funds and all that nonsense during a tech bubble of the 1990s, which many of you guys probably don't even remember as much. But for us, it was the IPO season. It was what your Bitcoin generation is seeing. There was real lottery ticket wealth being made in the late 90s in San Francisco and Northern Cal and Wall Street. And a lot of the quote unquote success I had was very accidental, but I've certainly learned a lot about markets. I think for your audience, it's not just about how to make it in the markets or how to invest, it's how to deal with whether you're comparing yourself to the Bitcoin millionaire down the street, or whether tech hasn't saved you, or maybe it has saved you, or whether you have questions about it, your sanity in investing in mortgages and real estate, whatever. All these things I look at all the time and I deal with all the time. I've been very lucky and somewhat successful. And through the combination of luck and success, I've gotten some knowledge. And so anything that you think your generation is interested to hear, I certainly have a sense from my own children, one of whom was at Goldman Sachs, the other one's commodity traders. So it's like I do know the mindset of your generation, but I want to let you ask the questions that are on your generation's mind rather than me preach to you about what I think your generation is thinking about.
Yeah.
A little gray now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm an elder millennial, so I'm hearing reverberations from Gen Z that it's not fair and the playing field's not level. I came up in a time where I dropped out of law school and was able to land a job in Seattle that paid me very little, but somehow miraculously, I started an agency, paid off my student loans. That's how I met you. I met you at an inflection point in my life where I was working for a penny stock trading company, and I just had a moral quandary to the extent that I burnt out and I quit. And you gave me a lot of solid advice. I think specifically that life just ebbs and flows. And one of the moments where I really realized that was during the um, COVID crisis. And I remember my buddy Curtis and I, who, you've also provided mentorship to, you told us to just hold. Just this isn't financial advice, but you just told us to like just sit put, don't do anything crazy. Like the things always come around, right? And maybe you could speak to that because you've gone through the dot-com burst, 2008, COVID, and now whatever we call what's happening now. And I think you provided a lot of solid advice during those times.
Well, I mean, again, it's a combination of philosophical life advice, good advice, bad advice, market advice, financial advice. But we're all human. Whether you get lucky during the dot-com bubble of the '90s, or whether it's Bitcoin in your generation, or tokenization, or whether we were talking about whether it's human things like COVID lockdowns, or heartbreak, or bad employers. When you're in the midst of hell, you think it's permanent. When you're in the midst of something that isn't working, you think it's permanent. Whether again, it could be relationship, it could be financial, it could be political around you, it could be family matters, it could be personal issues. On a philosophical side, and we've all been there, it's part of life. It gives you more empathy once you've suffered because it makes you a better person. When you're in it, though, you don't see it. And when I say just hold, Churchill famously said, when you're going through hell, keep going. It's hard to see that this too shall pass when you're in the midst of something. As long as you don't panic, become cynical, or become a victim, you actually will come out stronger. That relationship that brought you to your knees will be forgotten. That financial crisis will get better. Even in an environment now that seems very dark for many people, the advice is don't take it personally. Be patient. Do the work. Do something positive. Keep trying. That sounds very generic and Pollyannish, especially when you're really dark or when you're in a bad space. but you will get through it. And when it comes even financial, quote unquote, success or failure or problems, there's been times in my life where, and Neil knows this, we've all known this, who've been quote unquote successful, lucky, or deservedly wealthy. Even the money doesn't solve the problems. Even the money that's large can become smaller and then larger again. You can't keep measuring your happiness by these barometers, whether it's other people or whether it's your checking account or your portfolio, because you'll never truly find real peace. And again, it sounds very condescending, but the Ferrari's just a car. The big house is just a house. The new car smell eventually goes away. The big house is just nice, but after a few years, weeks, or months, you walk around those rooms, whether it's a small house or a big house, etc., that too will not make the difference. It won't sustain you for all things. Doesn't mean I'm against any of the perks of life, even true love. True love will have moments of euphoria and other times where you're questioning your sanity in it or your identity. If your identity is tied to these things, whether it's the markets, whether it's the woman or man across the table from you, whether it's your portfolio, or whether it's the opinion of others, if you haven't gotten that strength, regardless of those successes or failures, you're never going to get it and you'll never be happy. And look, I have a lot of toxically wealthy friends in Wall Street or in Switzerland or in the south of France on polo fields. Sounds real wanker, but I've never seen a correlation between money and happiness. Again, Frank Sinatra said, I've been rich and I've been poor. I'd rather be rich. Of course, when you're worried about the mortgage, the rent, the car payment, the tuition, it's suffocating. So I'm not trying to dismiss that. And I'm certainly not trying to dismiss ambition. I would just start out at the beginning by saying, don't think that those things will complete you if you're not complete yourself first. And whether that's a relationship with a person, relationship with wealth, or relationship with constantly comparing yourself to somebody who's got more. Your generation with social
media generation, yeah.
quantifiably more depressed than my generation, where I came up with, it wasn't an iPhone and there wasn't an Instagram or a Facebook to show off your latest success, your latest vacation, your latest romance, what have you. It's all about branding yourself. I think it's highly toxic. You guys know that. We all know it, but we still do it. I personally don't. I quit all those things myself, but I'm saying it's particularly hard in a new generation. And also in a generation like yours, which has a higher debt level, a weaker economy, more political polarization, more social unrest, more identity politics, more tribalism than anything I saw in the late 90s. It's an extra layer of stress for you guys. And again, this is more philosophical than it is financial. I would just remind you, you can't belong to anything else until you belong to yourself. The best way to belong to yourself is to go through hell, because that makes you more interesting, more compassionate. And when you're going through it, you may not think it's the best thing that happened to you, but it typically is. But again, when I was your age, when I was my children's age in my late 20s, it was the 90s. The wall had just come down. Markets were ripping, bonds, stocks, .com stocks, IPOs. You just could throw a dart and get lucky. And if you were really lucky, get really lucky. And there was a sense, like Fitzgerald said, F. Scott Fitzgerald, that you could choose your life like a menu. And we had this optimism and excitement, and the world was free, and it was a liberal democracy, capitalism, all seemed endless. There was a great book by Francis Fukuyama called The End of History, The Last Man. When I was in college, everything was open, everything was exciting, everything seemed not easy, but attainable for the hard work. Whereas your generation is facing global debt, national debt, personal debt, corporate debt, credit card debt, mortgages many of you can't even qualify for or afford, and identity politics, censorship, self-censorship, polarization, left or right, very few economic opportunities, market opportunities that I had at your age. And your generation is taking that personally as if it's something they've done wrong. And I think it's really unfair, because my children in their 20s have worked just as hard as me. That's much harder opportunities. So when people give advice and say, work hard, it'll be fine, we had a different time, a different advantage. That doesn't mean the human lessons aren't the same. And that doesn't mean there aren't opportunities for your generation to do well. Obviously, my expertise is in the markets, of which there are many, many blowhards, many people giving bad advice.
Yep.
Or confusing their financial success with intelligence. They're very different. But whether you're in the markets, whether you're in tech, whether you're in crypto, whether you're in precious metals, whether you're in S&P stocks, if you really do the work and really have a passion for something, I can talk all day long about that. But whatever your field, it's very easy for my generation, or me in particular, to say, find your passion, monetize it, succeed, when the opportunity circles are tighter and more stressful in the environment you guys are in right now. It's not your fault that your grandparents or the baby boom generation put your nation into so much debt. The interest
Yep.
rates, the currencies have lost their purchasing power, that the Bitcoin narrative is sticking because no one trusts government, no one trusts their dollar, no one trusts the system, the financial system, their politicians left or right. So you guys are facing an unusual load of shit from every angle.
No, yeah, for lack of better words, yeah. And that's funny that you brought up Francis Fukuyama. I just heard him on a podcast not too long ago, and he he basically touted that this was the end of the end of defending democracy in the 90s, right? And this is just gonna proliferate and spread across other nations, and what we've seen is the complete opposite. But he was cautiously optimistic. We do have these ebbs and flows, as to your point, like it's just a sequence that just keeps replaying itself. And what I'm finding now is the great divider is social media. I have really focused on creating a narrative arc in any kind of story I tell, rather than, hey, look at me, I'm on this vacation. Now I'm trying to like really delve into like storytelling. And it's because I was feeling inauthentic. And I think it's to the point as to why people don't watch TV anymore, or they don't trust authority. It's because everything just seems like a sham, like they're being swindled, right? So authenticity matters. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to start a podcast, not so much to monetize or anything, but just to share these stories. Um, I remember a specific trip. We went to Iceland, Curtis and I. So Curtis and I were just like, you know, vagabonds for a period of time, just trying to find ourselves. We go to Iceland, and Matt, you just show up randomly. And imagine being on this epic trip, looking at all these beautiful things, and then you have this philosopher like telling you what's going on in the world. I remember that was like one of the most dynamic trips and one of the great experiences, right? And to your point, I think I myself have become mentors to younger people because of the mentorship you've offered me. I've understood how life can suck, how you can be just ripping and rolling, and all of a sudden you just get brought to your knees. And
Yeah.
I think I experienced that over the last couple of years. And that's just life, right?
It's a very important, again, it's a necessary, there is no way to get through life without going to your knees for some reason. You can be born into it. You can have a very dysfunctional family. There can be addiction issues. I've seen it all. I have many friends who came back from combat who have other issues, which I can't imagine. Um, they're all different types of pain we go through in life. There is no immunity from that. It's, I think, how we react to it that's important. And again, the ebbs and flows of the market are cliche, a trite cliche compared to the ebbs and flows of our personal experiences. I find that once you get more humble and more strength from your adversity, you actually become stronger for sure. So you don't repeat those mistakes, you don't get heartbroken in the same way, you don't take risk in the same way financially. You evaluate your wealth, personal and literal, differently. And you have a hell of a lot more sympathy for people going through things. So you can be a better friend, a better boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, whatever, by making mistakes or having things go wrong. As long as you don't stay there, again, when you're going through hell, keep going. But I think there is no one who can escape these things. And in this branding culture that you're in, which is interesting because, I met you and Neil. Neil's obviously very successful in branding, in marketing, in digital marketing. He's self-made. He sat down in that basement writing code, figuring out the Google algorithms when no one else wanted to, and everyone else was out playing. He could barely afford Taco Bell at the time. Obviously, it's financially is very different now from the work. But even Neil understands the power of branding, the power of marketing, works fantastically online for businesses and services. I think when you try to brand and market yourself where you're, to your point, not authentically, where you're just advertising, where it's almost a desperate need to get validation from most people who really don't care. They care more about themselves than other people.
Of course, yeah.
I was talking to my kids about, heartache or love and branding online and looking for attention and kind of addictive relationships I've seen my children with their friends go through or themselves, and of course, which I went through too when I was younger. And I think, everyone's looking for love. No, I think love, to me, and there's so many different definitions, is when you actually care about someone's well-being and happiness more than your own. It's extremely rare, whether it's in a friendship or in a romantic relationship. Certainly as a parent, hopefully that's natural. I think Neil knows that now as a father. When you know, you can love your spouse, you can love your partner. When you have children together, my God, it's visceral. That child becomes such a priority. It should. And it's so easy to love. It's very hard to find that in personal relationships. And so failing that, you look for attention in all the wrong ways. You're
Mm-hmm.
branding yourself. I'm all about branding your business and services to help people commercially. When you brand yourself for attention privately, I think it's a very toxic trap. Again, I know that sounds Pollyannish from a guy who came above, who wasn't born into the Instagram culture. I see it
Mm-hmm.
as quantifiably very toxic. But your generation is figuring that out on your own. But again, your generation is facing economic interest rate debt driven, and we can get into the macroeconomics of that debt driven social unrest that's very much not your fault. But unfortunately, it's your responsibility not to fix it, but to navigate it. And I don't envy your generation. It's five times
Mm-hmm.
harder than it was for mine. And so it's easy
Yeah.
to talk about wealth or success or my fancy lifestyle. I was lucky, as William Gladwell said, to be born at the time I was and the circumstances I was and the timing I've had. I have seen people in your generation make money in Bitcoin or crypto. I'm not against it. I'm not necessarily for it. I prefer precious metals and other commodities to make my wealth stay. We could not a debate about gold versus Bitcoin or precious metals in Switzerland versus Bitcoin in America or anywhere in the world. But I certainly understand that there are huge opportunities to make money in your generation, the digitalization and tokenization. There are huge risks as well, too, though. But failing those kind of unicorn stories that everyone thinks everyone else has. Very few people have succeeded that way. Very few people are living the dream that is on Instagram or Facebook. Everyone knows a friend of a friend or from school who made it big in something. But the vast majority of younger people that I see or talk to don't have it that easy. And
Mm-hmm.
real easy for a polo player from the south of France like me to wanker on and on about how it's not that hard. It's very hard. And more
Mm-hmm.
importantly, you have to be very humble. A lot of it is luck. And I only say that so that people don't lose confidence in themselves. When I made the money, unlike Neil, who worked for it, when I made it in Wall Street in the late 90s, I knew it was a lottery ticket. And if I made money in Bitcoin, I knew it was a bubble. I never made myself think I was better for that. I never regretted it. Very glad I took the balls, had the risk to try, but I never took myself that seriously. And when you make 50 million and lose 10, it's not hard to lose 10 if you got 50. It's still a high class problem. And so you can still have failures once you've succeeded. A lot of the success is luck and timing. Much of it is hard work or risk, like Neil. And even in my case, there was a lot of risk it took to get lucky. But I did learn, and it was the best lesson I had, that um, you got to be humble, even if you've earned it through taking risks. But we all know that no one really deserves that kind of money, whether it's in Bitcoin, the Nasdaq, the S&P, the Dow. No one's really earned it. Saylor
Yep.
doesn't
And I think
has. Bezos doesn't deserve it. They've worked hard. It's almost a pathological amount of wealth. So you got to stay humble, and then you got to stay, I think, prepared for the kind of adversity that drops you, because we're all going to hit it. Whether you're worth millions and you get pancreatic cancer like Jobs. I mean, you can have
yeah.
life still throws you a reminder that we're very, very humble and very, very minimal, and that there are far more important connections to make rather than just your checking account. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's what's at the crux of all the disenchantment with just people in general right now. It's that extreme level of greed and lack of humility and lack of awareness of how people have gotten this rich. And I don't just see it with like the oligarch culture. Like, obviously I'm not interacting with them, but on media, it's very visceral, right? But people who are now becoming Bitcoin millionaires that are my age, there's a lot of great people
Yeah.
who are making a lot of money and have a lot of humility. But there's a lot of people who are just flouting it and acting like it just was earned or there was something in like of value that they provided that made them that rich. And it's like, no, you're just like riding that wave. Some people crashed and burned. I know myself specifically, I made a few bucks on the crypto, but I largely stayed out. And I'm not going to get into the reasons why. Curtis and I argue about this like nonstop. I'd rather just stay out of it. But I think he would agree, much like you have stated here, that you're kind of just a victim to your circumstance, whether good or bad. And then I know you are big on gold, and maybe you could like talk about that a little further, because everybody's just talking about crypto right now.
Yeah, and by the way, I have huge respect for crypto. I know that if I had bought
Mhm.
crypto at 1,000, I'd have sold it at 3,000. I wouldn't have had the balls to stay in. So for those that really bought early and stayed in for the long, whether their arguments are rational or irrational, give them credit for the conviction.
Yep.
And we could debate Bitcoin versus gold all day. I have nothing against Bitcoin speculation, nothing at all. And I have nothing against people who look at someone like Neil. He earned every penny. He put in
Hmm.
the hours. I don't think I earned it nearly as much by buying an IPO on the NASDAQ in the 90s. Very different way to make wealth. I think he earned it more, but I think Neil can stay humble and I can stay humble.
Yep.
And you see the wankers who aren't. But the other thing I think even Neil could say now, I'm sure he doesn't mind flying first class, but he'll know life still is hard. Problem with your parents, problem with your spouse, problem with life, problem with feeling safe for your kids, worrying about things. That's human. And just instant wealth might make things easier. It doesn't keep you from being stressed or even, frankly, depressed. That can happen to anyone. I've seen it. There's also something Oscar Wilde called this kind of strange poverty of the rich. I've seen it over and over with my the people I travel with or work with or do sports with in these circles. Again, I will say I've seen just as much, if not more, dysfunction among wealthy people trying to um, promote themselves or brand themselves as happy or successful when that definition of success is completely upside down. Again, you've got to separate success from financial success or political power or branding success. What is your definition of personal success? And I'm quite convinced, having been rich and poor in my life, that the definition of success has nothing to do with your income. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have ambition or the desire to get comfortable and to worry about mortgage rates and how to make it through. And if you want to have a family, how to freaking pay for it. Those are all massively big responsibilities. So I'm not trying to be dismissive of that. In your case, when you ask about gold, again, this isn't a financial podcast today with you. For me, gold, unlike Bitcoin, is more of a stay rich asset than a get rich asset. It just holds its value better than speculation assets, stocks, bonds, cryptos, meme stocks, whatever. And it's just because your generation is facing so much debt, the purchasing power of your dollar, whether you have millions or $10 or $100,000 or $1,000,000, it's like a very nice ice cube. It's slowly melting though. If you put 100,000, 10,000, 5,000 in a checking account 10 years ago, that 5,000 or 10,000 buys a lot less than it did then. To me,
Hmm.
that's the concern that's on my mind now. High class problem. Some of your audience may have the high class problem of having inherited wealth, made wealth. For me, gold is a way of just preserving wealth because gold holds its value far better than a dollar bill does. Crypto speculates much faster, it goes much higher, it's much more volatile. I just don't have the stomach for it anymore. In a simple
Same.
example,
Yeah.
a simple example is, we all listening who are Americans measure our wealth by American dollars, some by Canadian dollars, some by South African or Australian dollars, but we all measure our wealth in fiat money, means backed by nothing, paper money. Now digital, but it's backed by nothing. It used to be backed by gold up until the 70s in 1971. But that currency that you measure your wealth in, whatever that wealth is being stolen from you guys by the invisible inflation, the invisible tax, excuse me, of inflation. It compounds every year. So your $100 bill buys less and less each year. It's a crime. It's the crime of a government in too much debt, lying to you about inflation, lying to you about employment, lying to you about false promises to stay elected. And they're literally printing money out of nowhere at the Fed to create more money to pay off more debts. That's like adding water to a glass of wine. It's diluting the flavor of the wine. It's diluting the purchasing power of your money. Crypto, the Bitcoin narrative is all about this problem with fiat money debt. It's a very similar narrative to gold. My personal opinion is crypto can rise much higher than gold, but it doesn't hold its value because of its volatility. That's just a personal opinion. I'm very
Hmm.
happy people made money in Bitcoin. For me, gold just is a better ice cube. It doesn't melt. It holds its properties, whereas fiat money that you measure your wealth in loses value. And the simplest example is in the 1920s, gold was $20 an ounce. And the average home price in 1920 was $5,000. So if you had a shoebox of 250 gold coins, it was worth $5,000. 250 times 20 is 5,000 bucks. That would buy you a house.
Oh
Now,
my God.
you put that shoebox with the same coins in the ground and dug it up today, those 250 coins would be worth about 600, 700,000 because now gold has gone from $20 an ounce to 26 or $27 an ounce. In other words, the gold didn't do anything all those years, but hold its value better than if you put a shoebox of $5,000 in cash that you used to buy that house. In other words, the $5,000 that would buy your house in 1920 wouldn't buy the landscaping today.
Yeah.
250 gold coins would absolutely buy you a new house under today's price. And it's just a simple way of saying gold holds its value. Very unsexy, not nearly as fun or as trending or as popular as crypto. That's fine. Banks don't talk about it. Financial advisors don't talk about it because gold is a threat to their fiat system, to their debt system, to their government system. They'll talk about it kind of beneath their breath. Gold's outperformed the S&P this year, last year, compounding this whole century. It's a better performing asset, but no one talks about it because gold's a direct threat to the paper money system. The rise of crypto and Bitcoin was to be anti-fiat like gold, which is so it's another way of arguing that. Again, we won't get into the debate about that, but this problem with the purchasing power of your currency is something all of you guys should be concerned with. Doesn't mean you have to buy gold. I think people should, but it's not nearly as sexy as XRP,
ripping. Yeah.
And I invest in a lot of that. So I'm not against it. I'm just saying I'm at a point in my life where I'm worried about the preservation of my wealth. Gold is a metaphor for something that holds its value. It stands the test of time through shitty cycles of debt, bomb, boost, market, bubbles, and reverse. And again, you could use the metaphor that you have to have a golden mentality, not about assets, but about what is golden to you? What is your character? What are your values? What are your friendships? What are your connections? Those are golden. Those are immutable. Those are indestructible. That's where your value lies. What's gold to you outside of the markets, outside of currency risk? What is gold? And again, I'm not talking about the precious metal. It's very hard to see that when you're going through dark times or you're under a lot of stress or your generation is under a stress. And by the way, when you have this purchasing power destruction, which Bitcoin talks about, which gold investors talk about, when you have this invisible tax of inflation, that creates a lot of social unrest. That creates a lot of division. It creates a lot of polarization, not because of politics, because deep down people are broke. They can't make the payments. They can't get through the month. That makes people very political, very angry, very focused. And to me, it's not a coincidence at all that we're seeing society where we are. I've seen this throughout history. I've studied it throughout history in the history of markets. This is nothing new. When you have
it's funny. People are blaming social media, but it's not just social media. It's the inequality that's just very, very visceral, right? Like you can see it. And social media is a symptom, is like one of the causes, but it's not like the only symptom, right? It's like it's not the only thing.
Market look, I wrote a book called Rigged to Fail about the Federal Reserve. Again, crypto guys will understand this too. We all hate the central banks. They're repulsive. The central banks can print money out of nowhere to buy U.S. treasuries. I won't get wonky, but basically they can create inflation. They created inflation mostly in the stock market. 90% of stock market wealth is in the top 10% of American society. Mm-hmm. It's the Fed and its ability to what's called quantitative easing, which is just money printing or mouse click money, has created social division, wealth inequality, unlike we've ever seen before in the history of this country. Worse than 1789 revolutionary France, worse than 1917 Bolshevik Revolution Russia. We have right now in America a grotesque wealth inequality. And it's largely because the Fed inflated one asset class, stocks, including tech, including everything else. We spend hours on what they're doing now with crypto and this strategic reserve, Bitcoin reserve, and centralization of money and centralization of your ID, of your intelligence, of your privacy. But that's a longer story. But the power of the Fed and Wall Street banks has created the biggest wealth transfer in our history. And your generation is seeing that. They may not know how it all works in the wonky mechanizations of central bank monetary policy, fiscal policy. A lot of crypto guys do understand it. It is a wealth transfer. It's only helping a small minority. The vast majority are suffering. That creates social unrest. When there's social unrest, governments, left or right, become more controlling, more dishonest, more hyped. But really, they're just stealing from you. You can make that case for Republicans or Democrats. Platitudes versus reality, division, divide and conquer, create social unrest, exploit social unrest while they continue to reap the reward of controlling the information, controlling your information.
Yeah.
Very centralized system. Digital currencies like crypto, which were meant to be decentralized and outside of the system and kind of a maverick rebel currency, are now being co-opted by the very government they were trying to not be a part of. Doesn't mean you shouldn't go along Bitcoin or cryptos if you have confidence. It's still going to go up, but there's going to be support for it. I'm just saying, and I don't mind plugging my nose through the trade. It's morally being used by the government in ways that wasn't intended to do, but that's another story. But the wealth divide that we see in the markets, whether you're talking about gold, precious metals, cryptos, alt memes, uh, tokenization stocks, of which there are so many people may not understand the deeper reality of that, but nevertheless, that wealth is not being equally distributed.
Mm-hmm.
And people that are hardworking who believe in the American dream are not seeing the rewards of it, and they're taking it personally as if they've somehow failed.
Yeah.
And there's a huge fear of missing out or comparing yourself constantly because you didn't get into that stock early enough, or you didn't buy NVIDIA when.
Yeah. It's just, it hurts. You feel like, I mean, I grew up in a culture, I'm Indian, like success and wealth is everything. And I think that's super toxic. And a lot of people are realizing that now, but like, there's something like just deep down where if I missed out on a stock or an opportunity, I'm like, man, I need to work harder, but it's not even about that. And maybe you could give advice to, I think ultimately what this podcast seeks to do is provide advice to people in Gen Z or younger or anybody really as to how they can navigate all this, because I have great mentors. I have a big network of people who can provide me with this alpha and this intel, but a lot of people don't. So like, what can you do if you're just like some 20-year-old kid who just graduated working Uber and you have a computer science degree and you can't get hired because AI is taking all your jobs, or taking the jobs. Yeah.
No, it's crazy. I mean, there was, oh gosh, there was a story about this Starbucks in South Korea, and they were so proud that they had 0 employees and 50 robots. Isn't this great? Isn't this great? It's very dystopian. And you've got the head of NVIDIA talking about these humanoid chips they're making so much money on. So basically, you have a male or husband or wife come and put in a chip 20 years from now and have someone tell you they love you and do everything for you, but it's not even I think it's very dystopian. I think this is the new world. You're going to literally, like ATMs replace bankers or bank tellers, and at grocery stores, you see these poor people trying to show you how to do automatic checkout so that they can become obsolete. There is a dark side to the utopia of the tech will save you, and even Elon Musk sees this as being concerned with it. There's a dark side to what they're selling. You've got to be cognizant of that. The share prices are great. The social price for technology is a little bit more complicated. I think to the 20-year-old coming out, I'm not going to give advice on portfolio allocation or which is the best token stocks or the best cryptos or the best precious metal providers. That's not going to help in 5 minutes. But I think what I can say, having been rich later in life, but grew up not rich and was certainly not rich in my 20s or early 20s, and certainly when growing up, the best advice I can say is be worthy of your adversity. Don't be a victim of it. Be good at something. Be interested in something. I don't know what that is for each person. That's very different. Don't force it on you. Don't be a dentist, a doctor, a lawyer because that's what your parents said or society said. If you love law, dentistry, or medicine, do it. If you love tech and coding, do it. If your only goal in your culture and in Indian culture is just to get rich, I don't think that's enough. You've got to provide. You have to have the basics. Of course, you have to have shelter, income, some stability. That's very hard for your generation. But for the 20-somethings that are comparing themselves to everyone else on Instagram, that's toxic. You're better than that. You free yourself from that. Find something that's your definition of success, not somebody else's, and then do the damn work. Do the work. It's not going to come for free. It's not going to come land on your shoulder like a white dove on the road to Damascus and point you the way. You're going to have to do the work, and you better be worthy of failing more than once. We all do. The moment you become a victim, the moment you blame someone else, and believe me, there's plenty of people to blame, you're lost. Because, yeah, you could be right. And I talked to a Navy SEAL who had PTSD, who I'm very close with, who did tours, heartbreaking tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and had a lot of substance abuse issues, and actually some financial success too. It's ironic. But he was completely depressed, completely sense of failure, completely lost. And what saved him through a lot of different conversations with better men than me was this idea, which I've taken heart, and it's absolutely true. Any one of us can wake up in the morning and make a list of all the things that are shit in our lives, whatever it is, girlfriend, boyfriend, mom, dad, boss, colleague, guy on the street, people that have harmed us. We can make a long list of that too. People we can blame. They'd all be true. There's no doubt. So all of us can do that. We could blame the government. We could blame you fill in the blank. We all have somebody or many people that we can blame. or many circumstances we could blame, or many things that are wrong in our life that we seemingly can't fix. And we could look at that list every morning and it would be accurate. All of us can easily make a list of something we're grateful for: our Labrador, our best friend, a kind gesture. I know that sounds Pollyannish, but that list would also be equally true. The question is, which list do you want to focus on? In your personal life, your professional life, your financial life, your romantic life, whichever list you give more attention to is the list you're going to create. It's that simple. And for that Navy SEAL who's seen things that you and I can't imagine, even he can get past those things by focusing on what he can control, what is positive, what isn't victimhood, what isn't constant repetition of trauma. It's like a muscle. That brain is like a bicep. It takes work. It takes muscle memory like a sport to stop falling back into the comfort of negativity, of victimhood, of blame, because it's all true. Every one of us has a right to be that. It's easy. The harder muscle is to say, okay, I'll give that 10 seconds and go to something more positive. What can I do? We can all blame. Who can I be grateful for? Even myself. What can I be grateful for? What can I forgive myself for? Who do I have to forgive? That list of positive, highly positive thought processes is true for all of us too. And the difference between insanity and sanity, success and failure, is which of those lists are you going to focus on? That may sound simple. It's actually hard. It's hard to stay grateful, forgiving, tolerant, positive, forgiving of yourself, forgiving of others. It's hard to let go of friends that are toxic, habits that are toxic, people that are toxic, but you can do it. And we all intuitively know who they are and what those things are. And we all have to take the steps to do it. And it won't happen in one day, but you'll see progress in a matter of weeks, months, and quarters, where life just gets better because of where you put your attention. I'm absolutely convinced of that. That's the advice I give to a 20-year-old, not which stock to buy, which Swiss bank, which gold vault to put your money, or which meme is going to make you a millionaire. We're all going to end up in a cemetery one day. There's not going to be a U-Haul following us there with all our shit. Things we're going to remember on that last hour, that last breath, are the people we connected with, the people we loved, the people we forgave, the people who forgave us, and the connections we had. Those are that's the true wealth. Of course, we still would like to have the nice car in the house along the way. Love it. Great. Vacations. Great. Travel. Great. Aspire to that. But don't let that become your master, or you'll just be a slave. And you'll miss the bullshit.
Yeah, and I think a good real life example is like the fires that just occurred. You used to live in Los Angeles. You moved from literally Malibu before the pandemic. And I had a few friends who've lost homes and everything they ever owned. And that struggle and that challenge is going to be almost insurmountable, but they're all alive. They're all healthy and they've been in good spirits, right? All their stuff is in that house. It's all burned down. Yeah. Can't even imagine, but they have a great mindset, and it's just surprising how positive they've been. And it just goes to show what really matters. And I know that's really big for you. What matters, right? Matt wrote a book, What Matters, and I have it on my bookshelf, and I always like randomly open it up and read it when I need to. It's just so beautiful. And thanks for writing that. And thanks for being on and taking the time. I know you're speaking right now in Vancouver, I believe, and you took some time out to talk to the audience. And I appreciate you.
And I've no doubt you're going to make that positive list continue, as you already have. And we'll all get hit by some curveball. I promise that'll happen too. Tell it to my kids. Don't get cocky, even when things are going well.
Yeah.
Don't be defeated by them, no matter what it is. From Christopher Reeves to you and me, we can get through things, even the hardest things. So
yeah. Well, thank you for your time, Matt, and hope to have you back on one day once this gets bigger.
Cheers. All right, then I'll hit recording.